What do women want? What do women think? What even is a woman? We're going to get to the root of all of those questions today on Speechless. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Speechless. I'm your host, Kev Phares, 22-year-old conservative college student out of Central Illinois, host of Speechless on Cities 92.9, which you might be listening to me on Speechless on Cities 92.9 right now. And if you are, just want to remind everybody, you can go check out this video on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or Rumble, where I am streaming it live right now. But I will be honest with everybody, this is a pre-recording. I had some other obligations this upcoming Sunday where I could not necessarily be in studio live, but thank you guys so much for tuning in. And if you are watching on one of the live streams, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment what you think, and share it with your friends because they might want to know these messages too. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. We have a lot to talk about, and let's get right on into it. But I also do want to give a quick shout out to my good friend Paul Garcia, who sponsors this show. Paul Garcia out of Central Illinois hosts and helps businesses locally make some of the best video content possible for a business to advertise their business. So if you want to help your business get more business, visit Paul Garcia Productions today out of Central Illinois. That's Paul Garcia Productions. You can check out his information in the description of this video, but let's get right on into it. On this show, I often talk about contemporary denigration of gender, issues surrounding women, dating, and what it's like to be a young person while the world seems to be imploding. But as many of you know, I'm not a woman. And you get to hear my perspective, but how informed am I in terms of the female perspective? I'm a 22-year-old conservative college man. I could change it, though, if I really want to. We know how the world works now. But today, because I'm not a woman today, I have invited someone who has firsthand knowledge of what it's like to navigate young womanhood when people are questioning what that even means. She's not a political science junkie. She's not an outspoken activist. She's your average girl in her early 20s that has opinions just like you and I. And now, the reason I invited her on today is because I think it's worth hearing those opinions as they represent a significant portion, about half, of the next generation of voters and contributors to society. So today, my guest is the sister of my good friend. I would also consider her a good friend. Jaida Bender, sister of Josh Bender, my longtime friend. And she's here to discuss. Sorry, I got choked up there real quick. Just having the sister of my best friend on the show. But she's here to discuss everything under the sun regarding the effects of the sexual revolution, hookup culture, the next generation of women, what they're told, what they believe, and even what even is a woman. So, Jaida, it's great to have you on.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And you said you've never been on a podcast, never been on a radio show, anything like that before?
Correct.
Awesome. Well, glad we could have you here, and everybody bear with her if she's not necessarily as entertaining as yours truly, but I guarantee you she's going to be quite insightful on a lot of these issues. And if you want to share your opinion on what Jaida has to say, don't forget you could text in at 309-451-9299. I might not be live in studio, but I will be fielding those texts from wherever I'm at. Jaida, let's just get into know you. Who is Jaida Bender?
All right. Well, I'm originally from Illinois. I'm currently in Wisconsin right now, going to school to be a nurse. I'm in my first year of nursing school, and I'm a conservative, and which is, I would say, pretty difficult on a college campus. I'm in the Milwaukee area, and I feel that I struggle to have a voice on campus at times just because I'm surrounded by people that don't necessarily share the same views as me, which is fine, but it does get hard sometimes, and I tend to keep quiet, I would say, about my opinions.
Yeah, okay, so you're a conservative, and obviously that's a minority not only as a college student, but also as a woman. Lead me down that path as to how you figured out you were a conservative.
It wasn't until Trump was president, actually. I never really.
So what were you before that? Like
I didn't know. I didn't care. I wasn't into politics. I could care less about it. And I think kind of when Trump became president and the whole pandemic situation happened, and kind of like, I would say all around there is kind of when I started paying more attention to it. Also, with Josh. He obviously is super into politics, and
Yep.
I would hear about it that way and just would kind of gauge my own opinions based off of what he said, because we agree on a lot but also disagree on a lot. And I think that's kind of when I started to actually care about politics and feel like I actually have an opinion on what is going on in this world.
Absolutely. And so I know I've talked about this with Josh before, but and Josh being one of my good friends, frequent contributor to the show, if this is your first time ever watching or tuning in. But to be clear, your parents were never super politically talkative or active, anything like that?
No, I never talked about politics with my parents until Josh got involved in college. And then we kind of all started talking as a family, because at that point, I would say it was around my, I don't even, maybe sophomore year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I started to care more, and now I'm a junior in college. So, and I think around that age too, I kind of started to realize more things around me and not be so like oblivious to like, oh, I'm a teenager, nothing matters. Where I kind of got to that age where I realized that things that happen now mattered later in life. So
Yeah, and I know I sent you obviously some of the topics that I want to get to, but just wanting to talk more a little bit about your experience. So being in college as a conservative female nursing student, do you notice in your classes any kind of liberal bias, or and what do you do about it if you do?
In my gen eds, yes,
Hmm.
I notice bias. So far in my program, I have not noticed any bias. I think they kind of try to not bring that into the practice as much, because when you're a nurse, that doesn't matter. It just, all that matters is taking care of people at the end of the day. That's what we're there to do. That's what we care about. And so I haven't noticed any bias that ways, but definitely in my gen ed, so my first 2 years, there was some bias. And I think there were many times that I had to write papers, and I would just write to please my professor. And I
Hmm.
would just, even if it's not what I agreed with, I would write to, just get that good grade and go on with my day. I did have one class that talked a lot about the health system and kind of like the way the health system is, and how, I mean, the health system is flawed. No matter what way you look at it, there are flaws in it.
Yeah,
And
I don't think most people that watch my show, listen to my show, would disagree with that. Absolutely.
yeah, and no matter which way you come from it, there are flaws. I see flaws in it, and that's just how it is.
Hmm.
It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. And that professor was really good. That was the one class I felt that I could say my opinion and me not be graded poorly because it wasn't what she felt was right.
And
That
so,
was
what was it about that professor? What did they do that made you feel more comfortable that others might have lacked in?
um I don't know. It's honestly just kind of like a vibe I got from her. Um she didn't seem judgmental
Hmm.
about what students had to say. And I think I was really the only person in my class that had the views that I have. And in class, I wouldn't say them as much. Mind you, this is a class of 15 people. It was one of my honors classes, so it was very small,
Yeah, yeah.
more like seminar based, but it was still a nursing class. It went towards my nursing credits. So it was still all nursing majors for the most part.
Nice.
But we had to do like weekly reflections and just talk about what we learned in the class, what our opinions on it. And in that opinion section, I said 100% how I felt. And every single time she would validate the way I felt. She never said I was wrong. She never graded me poorly because of it. And
Like
and
I can understand your perspective, and wow, that's an interesting take,
yep,
kind of thing, right? Which is
yes.
all that most conservatives like myself, people who are very politically active. Obviously, you're not super politically active. You
Mhm.
have your opinions and everything. But that's most of us what we want. I don't need somebody who preaches everything I say. I
Right.
just don't want them to get preachy in a classroom, and I want them to at least say, "Wow, that's like an interesting perspective, and I'm happy you bring that to the table. We're not asking. I feel like that's not too much to ask, and I'm happy you had that experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think there have been other classes where it's just liberal opinions, and I just sit there and bite my tongue because I don't want to be the one person who gets ganged up on ultimately just because I have different views. It's not worth it to me. I'm just there, get a good grade and leave. That's all I'm there for.
Totally understand that. Totally understand that. Well, I do want to get your perspective a little bit more on just the entire kind of generation of young women that we have right now. And one thing that really led me to wanting this to have part of this conversation is many conservative pundits not too long ago and some politicians cheered this in the last few months when a federal survey was released that showed 12th grade boys were nearly twice as likely to identify as conservatives versus liberals. Only 13% of boys identified as liberal or very liberal. And one thing I talked about on the show that I thought was interesting about this survey is that a lot of conservative pundits ignored this, that according to the survey, a survey from the University of Michigan, the share of 12th grade girls, so the girls on the opposite side, identified as liberal. And that rose from 19% in 2012 to 30% in 2022. Only 12% of girls identified as conservative. So you're in a stark minority, and that's from about 12th grade girls, so around 18, but only a few years ago for you. Why do you think that is? That one, that there's such a dichotomy, but also specifically for women that they're liberal?
I think that women see conservatives as like an enemy and that they're against women. And I think...
Why is that? Why do they see conservatives as an enemy and against women?
Because I think, and I can't speak for everyone because I know conservative can sometimes have different views on things, but I think just overall, a lot of our views, women tend to think are like against women rather than it just, I mean, I kind of see it just like the way of life as some things are that we think. And it's hard. And I saw it when I was in high school. I mean, my high school was very diverse. And there was a handful of us that were conservatives, and my whole friend group was. So, I mean, we all got along, but I mean, you could definitely see that there was a divide at some points because people had just different views on different things, some things that didn't really matter that much. And just, you know, for the age we were, it shouldn't really matter as much as it did. And, you know, and I feel like I can't really put my finger on it as to why that is, but I definitely think celebrities have a big play into that, into the way they influence young females to think a certain way and act a certain way. And I think a lot of times we feel that we can't think for ourselves, so they just go to what's comfortable and what the rest of the group is doing.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that. And that's one thing that I was thinking about recently. By the time this airs, I'll have just had a video that aired about on my YouTube channel about Taylor Swift and a lot of things that she's done. And that's actually, you were one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, was because you were in my comment section where Josh and I had a brief talk about Taylor Swift. And it was about this topic, and I think you kind of are leading into it a little bit. Last month, Vote.org told Insider that their largest national voter registration since 2020 occurred on National Voter Registration Day, because of Taylor Swift. In her messaging and on an Instagram post to her like 270 million followers, T Swizzle said, "Are you registered to vote yet? I've been so lucky to see so many of you guys at my U.S. shows recently. I've heard you raise your voices, and I know how powerful they are. Make sure you're ready to use them in our elections this year." Vote.org noted that 35,000 people registered to vote and 157,000 eligible voters visited the site on Tuesday in part because of Taylor Swift's message. And that represented a 22% jump in total registrations and 115% increase among 18-year-olds since last year, meaning that she more than doubled the amount of 18-year-olds that registered to vote on that day. And she's not a political pundit. She has no political experience. She's obviously made her political opinion quite clear with songs like "You Need to Calm Down" and expressing a distaste for Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn, who's a Republican. She's pushed a lot of LGBTQ plus messaging. And she targets people like you. I mean, you're her target demographic. So given that you're part of that demographic, what do you think about her having such a large influence over the young people and in ways swaying those young minds that don't necessarily know or are trying to figure out life at that time?
Well, for starters, I can't stand her. I can't stand Taylor Swift.
Why is that?
Because she's annoying. She uses
her spit out my water.
she uses her platform to push these agendas on females who don't even know who they are, who are figuring out for themselves who they are. And then they see someone like, oh, I like her music. I look up to her. She thinks this. I'm going to think that. And I feel like it almost just blindsides them to what is actually happening in the world, because they're just going based off of oh, I look up to this person, so I'm going to think what they think. And I used to like Taylor Swift. I was a Taylor Swift fan back when I was in like 6th grade.
#Swiftie.
I went to her Red tour. I was there. I like her old music, but I think just who she is now, and I think she thinks she can like take over like this generation. I'm not for it though. I mean,
she still has a lot of influence though, and so how do you think we combat some of this? And there's obviously some other things that I want to get into in terms of women being very liberal, but combating some of this as a conservative woman yourself, how do you think we start to appeal to women that might be in that stage where they're starting to listen to Taylor Swift and maybe taking some of what she says seriously? How do we combat the narrative that Republicans hate women? And I would also add some things you didn't necessarily mention, but I would add is like maybe some of the lefty abortion narrative and the idea of, well, pro-lifers actually just want to control women's bodies, things like that. How, in your opinion, do we combat the narratives pushed by the left and by Taylor Swift that Republicans are anti-woman, anti-LGBTQ, and in seriousness, just anti-young people, kind of?
I don't necessarily think it's a lost cause, but I think it's going to be very hard because they're set in their ways. I love hearing what other people have to say, whether they agree with me or don't agree with me. I can sit there and have a conversation with people about different views. When I lived in the dorms, my suite mates didn't have the same views as me, but we could sit there and have a conversation about it. That's not the same way for everybody though. And I think that's where it gets hard because they're so stuck in their ways that they don't want to hear what the other side has to say. And I think that's where a lot of these problems come in, and they just think, oh, I'm right. Conservatives are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. So they don't sit to listen because they don't want to listen.
So just trying to show people that we're open to conversation would be a big help, you think?
I think that could help, but it's the big part is getting them to have a conversation and not getting defensive about it.
Absolutely. And so I want to get back to that statistic that I mentioned earlier. Young men, 12th grade men are trending very, very conservative, as 12th grade women are trending very, very liberal. You yourself have been in a relationship for quite a while. Yep. And so how do you think that'll affect future relations between young men and young women? How do you think it might have already affected relationships between young men and young women?
I mean, I think it's different person to person. Personally, for me, with how different the views are today, I could not be with somebody who has different views than me. Because there's such a divide between it. I feel like there's no more like being in the middle, really. For some people, yes, but I feel like a lot of people are either left or right. There's not a lot of in between. So personally, for me, I don't think I'd be able to do that. I'm sure there's people out there who could do that, and maybe they're better than me for that. I don't know. But personally, for me, I think that honestly could cause a lot of problems, especially when it comes to things like abortion.
Mm-hmm.
When you're, especially at my age, like that can cause problems if you and your significant other don't have the same views on that, and something were to happen, that can cause a lot of problems. So, and I think like for people who are dating, who start dating, I feel like that's something that you should say right off the bat. What are your opinions? What do you think about things? Get into those conversations, because I would rather know that beforehand than date someone for a while and then not know that that's what they thought about something.
Absolutely. Do you think that it could be? And actually, I want to ask a lead up question to this one first. Are you dating for marriage?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you think that this could be a part of a overall generational destruction of the institution of marriage? Not necessarily like it's going to be fully destructed in our generation, but it could be part of it. Is a great divide politically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what else do you think plays a role in that? Do you see a lot less people? I mean, statistically, a lot less people are getting married right now.
Mhm.
Many people are even not even deciding not even to have children. Even if they do get married, they tend to treat animals like children and say, "Oh, I'm a dog mom." And I get it; it's kind of fun and cute, whatever. But they act like that's the same thing. Why do you think that is?
I think it depends on the way you look at it. I think a lot of conservatives don't want their kids to kind of be raised in the way the society is today. And I don't blame them one bit for that. I think that there's this big like hookup culture
Mhm.
going on now where
Explain
people
what that is for anybody listening, because I think a lot of my listeners tend to be of a more experienced generation, and so what does hookup culture mean?
basically you date just to date, or you are with somebody just to
For
get
the
with
purpose,
somebody.
You can say sex
Yes,
on this
yes,
show for the purpose of sex.
for the purpose of sex, one night stands, stuff like that, and they just
Hmm.
constantly just do that and no hopes to get anywhere with it.
Yeah. Who do you think right now controls the sexual marketplace? You know what that means?
Yes,
Okay.
but
I
I
just
don't
wanted to know.
know. Um,
Because I firmly believe it's women. I think women control the sexual marketplace.
I honestly I could agree with that.
And the reasoning for my belief in that, and I'm interested on your thoughts, is significantly because of, well, it started all with like the sexual revolution with back in like second wave feminism, 70s, 80s ish, 60s, late 60s a little, that saying that women, not only do you not need a man, and you can do everything a man can do, you can go and just like men have in the past, you can go sleep with whoever you want to. And I'm not defending the men who have done it in the past, but you can go sleep with whoever you want to, and you shouldn't be objectified for it. The only person that should objectify you is yourself, and you should be able to do whatever you want with your body in that way. And it's led to this kind of, now we have things like Cardi B, who basically says all I am is my genitals, and I don't need to cook or clean, but I'll tell you how I got the ring. And so that's the kind of, and so now what we have is we have women who will shame men for wanting that natural urge for sex, while at the same time, it's not necessarily the same women, but you have women that are also selling their bodies online through paywall services such as OnlyFans, some indulging obviously in Pornhub and other ways, as and that has been a very lucrative financial, or a very lucrative investment for many women, in which they've become millionaires off of simply just showing pictures of their body, if not even uh, genitals or anything. It could be just their feet, and they make a lot of money doing that. Any man who tries to get into that market, while there are a few, has a lot harder of a time, and so that's why I'm a firm believer. Well, and with a little bit of that historical context in there, that women control the sexual marketplace. What do you think?
I would agree with that, and I think personally for me, I wouldn't say necessarily judge the women who do that. I mean, I think you gotta do what you gotta do. Um,
I judge them, but you don't have to. I'll say it. But I don't.
If you're, as long as you're not affecting somebody else or harming somebody else, I don't care what somebody does. And if it's all about you and you're the only person you're harming, embarrassing, you're ultimately degrading yourself at that point. But if that's what you want to do, that's your choice to do that. But I think women kind of do, especially women artists and rappers, they rap about that stuff, about my this, my that, got me that, like, and it feeds into the young minds. Like I was talking about with Taylor Swift, it feeds into the young minds, and then women have this mentality, or young women had this mentality of, oh, I can just sleep with whoever I want and that's going to get me what I want, but I don't have to stay with that person. And I would never be like that. Never have been like that. I've always been a relationship person.
Do you know people that are kind of like that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Can you tell me, obviously don't name drop for if this actually goes viral or anything, but can you tell me a little bit about like how those people are in terms of like socially versus privately? Do you think that they act the same way in a social setting as they do like maybe one-on-one or something like that? If you can understand what I'm asking.
From my experience, yes, they do act the same.
Okay.
But I know that's not the case for every person who is that way.
Do you think they're happy?
No, they say they're not. I mean, I know they're not. There's young women who are like that, but yet they sit there and say they want a relationship, but then they go and act the way that they do. And I think a lot of it is how women carry themselves. And for me, I've always dressed very conservative. I've never really like shown off my assets. Like I've never been like that. And I think now, like, a lot of women do that to get what they want. And if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But I think,
what do they really want? Because that's the thing, is like you said, you'll hear them say they want a relationship, and then they go act like that. And when I say like that, they'll basically kind of hoe around, as the kids would say. They'll hoe around a little bit, and then they'll also, then after all of that, and then they say they're not happy, then I often hear the line or some variation of it, there's no good men out there. Where have all the good men gone? Like, so what do you think they really want? What do they want? Do they even know?
No, and that's the thing. I don't think they know what they want. I think my generation, and I would say, well, actually all of my generation, has a lot of growing up to do. I would think like some of our mindsets are just kind of not where they should be. And I'm speaking more so for like 18 to like 21-ish. Just in that specific aspect too, like just not knowing what they want, and then it leads them to do silly things. And then I hear stories of, oh, this person slept with this person, and then I got this because they slept with this person after it's just it goes like that. And I mean, it goes both ways. There are guys out there that aren't the greatest. I mean,
no, absolutely.
Especially being in college. I mean, they're not all great people, but
no, absolutely. But at least from my experience, and I'm curious, in social settings, like one thing that we have here is this app called Yik Yak. It's basically like anonymous Twitter. I don't know if you have that at your college.
Yes, we have it.
But I all the time see people complaining about how awful men are. So-and-so cheated on this person, or this man's a man hoe, and sleeps around, and all these things. But then at the same time, I will also see things that are like, you shouldn't judge a woman for her body count. You shouldn't judge a woman for her body count. And for anybody listening out there, body count means like basically the amount of people that you have slept with. It's young people slang. And so I feel like while in the past, from what I've heard, it was very much like men could be the people that kind of sleep around and never get judged for it. And then women would be judged for it. It would be problematic. Firmly, I'm in the position of, I think that if you treat yourself like crap and sleep around with anybody who's willing to take you, then you should probably have some level of judgment, at least from yourself on it, either gender, whatever. But do you notice that as well in terms of that kind of shift in dichotomy where now it's the men are judged? I don't know. Maybe you see it differently, but
I think I'm kind of out of touch with that, I would say, because I'm in a happy relationship. So I don't really focus on like those type of things. But I will say with the body count, I judge people regardless. If you're male or female, I'm gonna judge you if you have a high body count. That I mean, that's just how it is. I think.
absolutely. But I want to get to that. Okay, because here's the thing: is so a record number of our generation also is not identifying as any type of religious. I do. I don't know. Do you identify as any kind of religion or maybe spiritual or?
I don't practice, but I was raised Catholic, so
Okay, so you have an understanding of that, and you kind of have a moral framework from the from your history in Catholicism, and so my question to that being is so what is the point, or why do you judge somebody that has a high body count, but why do you think others? Because my firm belief is it's rooted in religion, and we can break that down. But why do you judge people? What is the root of your judgment for somebody who has a high body count? Why? Why does that matter?
it's not that it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
People can do what they want to do, but I just think that if you think that way about yourself, to be able to sleep with anybody who wants to sleep with you, one my big thing, you have to value yourself before you can be in a relationship. You have to know
Absolutely.
your worth before you can be in a relationship. You have to love yourself before you can do that. Well, if you're sleeping with anybody who is willing to, well, then you're not valuing yourself. So how can you get further into a relationship process? How can you get farther into actually knowing what it's like to love somebody and actually knowing what it's like to have somebody care about you if you can't end that whole culture, I would say, of, oh, if they want to sleep with me, I'll sleep with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I judge people for it.
No, absolutely. And my biggest thing too is because so I'm currently single. And so I look at it from a little bit of a different lens, but like the way I see it in terms of looking for a potential partner is that if you have a high body count, similar to what you said, and you obviously to an extent don't respect yourself, but you also can't or don't have a history of commitment. And so if you don't have a history of commitment, how am I supposed to rationally expect you to be able to commit to me? And I think that's kind of where a lot of it stems from, at least in mine. Along with just the fact of there's the general judgment as a Catholic myself, and that moral rooting is that I just don't. I think it's yes, there were prostitutes that sat with Jesus and listened to him, and there's something to be said about that. I'm sorry, but as somebody I want to surround myself with, I don't necessarily want. I'll talk to you if you want to talk about possible redemption, and you recognize that you're not happy in the life you're living. But if you're out there saying I'm loud and proud and this is exactly who I want to be, I don't really have time for that. If you want any kind of redemption, I'd be more than happy to help you, but not you, Jaida, but to the hypothetical whore that I'm talking to. But moving from that to the idea of just so women are, and I'd say some men find themselves in this too, but I can talk to young men about their issues. Women that find themselves in this predicament where they are unhappy, kind of what I laid out earlier, that they sleep around and I, like I said, parts of society, and like you agreed, parts of society, like a lot of rappers and famous people say that it's perfectly fine to sleep around and you should. They go to do it. They come back, say, I'm not happy. Where have all the good men gone? For their unhappiness, do you think that it has anything to do with the dichotomy of a natural want to have a companion and the societal expectation of women that we discussed that pulls them in a separate direction? To the societal expectation to sleep around and maybe a natural want for companionship and commitment?
Yeah, I mean, society tells them to act one way, but their body wants them to act a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So they ultimately are getting pulled into different directions of, well, which is the right way. They act one way, aren't happy with that, but they're going to keep going back to the other way because that's how society is expecting them
Mm-hmm.
to act.
How do we solve that? Big question. I know.
I think people need to figure out who they are before they actually decide what they want to do. Before, I think therapy is great for everybody.
All right, therapy. I would also argue maybe moral upheaval of every social structure that's currently set into place, or not everyone, but a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the ways that we view social structures. I would say a lot of that. I knew that was a big question. I was just trying to stump you a little bit. But therapy works for some, and everybody could probably benefit from a little bit of it. And so, speaking of therapy, we have a mental health crisis going on currently in our country, especially among young people. Over 50% of our generation currently is diagnosed with anxiety, depression, both or some level of a mental illness. What is your experience with that? Obviously, we talked about some of the potential causes. What else do you think could be a root cause of that, and how do we go about solving it? A lot of big questions, and I can remind you along the way as you find some answers.
I am a very big mental health advocate. I struggle with it myself. I have very bad anxiety. I've had it since I was in 4th grade. I don't even know how many years that is now, but I've had it a long time. And I think that more and more young people are kind of being aware of what mental health is. And I think that the pandemic had a huge play in that, because we were all cooped up in our houses and didn't have anything to do, and we're really stuck with our own thoughts. I think that's when a lot of people realize that they may not be as okay as that they thought they were. And I think at first people were kind of scared to say, I'm not okay, especially amongst young men. I know that there's this big stigma that men have to be mentally okay. Men can't be depressed. Men can't have anxiety. Men can't do this. Where I think that you have to get help. And that's the biggest thing is, well, the hardest part is realizing you have a problem.
Yeah.
And when I say problem, I don't mean problem in a bad way. I just mean you got anxiety. Okay. Now what are we going to do to fix that? Because there's many ways now, especially to cope with anxiety. And a lot of people don't like medication. That's fine. You don't have to go on medication for it. There's like these like text therapists now where you can be like, I'm anxious, and just text them and they talk you through it over text. You don't even have to show your face.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of colleges have counseling services. Like my college, they have therapists and stuff there that is for people who don't have insurance, can go there and at least talk to somebody. Because I think the biggest thing is people don't want to talk about it. And that is what's driving our mental health crisis so high. It's because people bundle up their emotions and don't think it's okay to talk about when it's something that needs to be talked about.
Absolutely. And so one thing I want to talk about when it comes to all of that as well, because I think you make a great point when it comes to not necessarily wanting drugs, and that's fine. Some people obviously do, and there's kind of a different treatment plan for everybody. One thing that's been really staggering to me, one number, as we've talked a lot about the differences between the genders and everything, is young men ages grades 9 to 12, so freshman through senior of high school, are almost 2 times as likely to attempt suicide than women. What do you think is the cause of that? And I know that's a men's issue, but I'm curious from a female's perspective. What do you think is the cause of that? And how do you think women may be able to play a role in helping with that?
I think it's because they have a stigma that they can't feel the way that they feel. And
see, I disagree with that though. I want because I'd agree if it was 10 years ago. I'd agree 10 years ago.
Okay.
But nowadays we have a society that pushes, if you feel like a woman, you can become a woman. If you feel literally any way you feel, it is more than valid. Even if your feeling contradicts basic truth, we have a society that says that.
Mhm.
And so I would have agreed with you. And so I hate to, I'm sorry if I got aggressive. I know that I can get aggressive sometimes, but I disagree with you on that, because we have a society right now that says everybody feel whatever you want all the time. And maybe a home life is different. Maybe you have a very traditional father that says if your young boy, if your son cries, then he's a wuss or something like that. Okay, that. But as a society as a whole, I don't agree that men couldn't feel or can't feel the way they want to or aren't encouraged to.
I agree with what you're saying, but I think that's where this whole like make it make sense thing comes in, because we have a society that says you can be what you want, you can do who you want, you can act how you want, you can do all these things, but then when it comes to I want to say it's more like, and I don't know what the stats are on this or if there are stats, so correct me if I'm wrong. It's more like manly men that commit suicide, because for them, they have it drilled into their head that they can't show emotion.
Okay.
And they can't act that way. And I think a lot of times it is how a person was raised and how their household is. If they come from a very traditional household, well, regardless of what society says, you learn the most at home. And
I understand that. I want to propose maybe a middle ground to this, because it's a thought I've had, is that it stems a lot from, you have a society that says feel everything. You might have a home life that says feel nothing, but then you also have a personal want to be a manly man. But then you also have a society that says feel everything. But if you start to feel anger, as many men do, and men tend to show anger more than women biologically, then you're toxic. And they're told that you're a toxic man, and then expressing traditional manliness, maybe roughhousing a little bit more, maybe some of the ways men joke around with each other, or being maybe a little bit more I don't want to say violent, but again, aggressive, is once again told that it's toxic. And so that's where I think it could stem from, is it's be who you are, but if it's something that I don't like, then it's toxic.
I can agree with that.
So a conflicting message. Once again, we're finding a root in both the genders of conflicting messages from both what seems to be somewhat more natural to what society tells them to be, causing a sense of unhappiness. Who knew? Being acting unnaturally would cause you to have some level of unhappiness. But I do want to get to the second part of that question, which is, what role do you think women can play in aiding these young men that are dealing with these suicidal thoughts and actions?
I think there's two different women out there. There's women who are okay with men having feelings, like me, for instance. Like, if something's going on with my brother or my boyfriend or whoever, I'm like, talk to me. I don't want anybody to have to bottle up their feelings. Whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. No one should have to sit there and think about their own feelings. I mean, if they don't want to share, they don't have to. But I think that there's women who are okay with it. And then there's women who have this idea of, well, if you want to be a manly man, you can't show that you're sad. You can't cry. You have to act like this. And I think women, there's two different spectrums there. And again, I feel like there's no in between on that. It's either you have to act like a man, or act like a man, but it's okay to be sad sometimes. It's okay to be anxious sometimes. It's okay to not want to do things sometimes. And I think there's two very different roles there that women can play into it.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of mental illnesses, a common question that has come up a lot in the media recently, within the last year or two, based on just an absolute surge in people identifying differently. A common question, and you're a nursing major, so I expect a little bit of expertise on this. What is a woman?
As a nursing major, a woman is someone who has women genitalia. I mean, it's there. There's no other thing to it. It's biology. It's biologically.
What about hermaphrodites? I don't know if that's the socially acceptable term, but like, you know what I'm talking about? Like people that are born with both sets of genitalia.
It's actually ironic you bring that up because I was talking about this with some of my classmates because there is and I don't know if it's still a thing, but we learned about it in one of my classes where that does happen and or they'll be like partially have one and partially have the other, and these parents decide to have them get the surgery while they're a kid, and how the left argues how can you do that to a kid? You have to let them decide for themselves and all this stuff. And I mean, while it would be great for those kids to be able to decide, I mean, that would take a long time for them to decide that, and those parents making those choices for them and saving those kids like a lifetime of bullying, in my opinion.
Well, there's that. But mainly what I meant is, so if genitalia is what determines gender, what about hermaphrodites?
I don't know.
Exception to a rule?
There's always an exception to a rule, apparently.
Well, that's my point being, because I commonly get that question because I'll make a comparable statement to what you did in terms of the what is a woman question. And then I get, well, what about this one thing? And usually what I say, and keep this one in your back pocket because you might get it at some point, is we teach everybody that humans come with 10 fingers and 10 toes. There are some people that come out with 9 fingers. That does not mean that humans do not have 9 fingers. That does not mean that humans have 9 fingers. No, humans have 10 fingers, 10 toes, and then there are medical exceptions. And that's what a hermaphrodite would be. Women are an adult human female, somebody with XX chromosomes and female genitalia. And then hermaphrodite would be the medical exception, and something to take into account, but does not validate an entire level of gender. And I know I only have a few more questions for you here, but speaking of people that identify as a gender that they are not, I know you have a sports background to you, and a huge thing that's been in the news is biological men competing in women's sports. Why don't you go a little bit into your sports background, and then thoughts on biological men competing in women's sports?
Yeah, so I played sports pretty much my whole life, just a variety of different sports. And in high school, I was on the cheer team, and it was basically my whole life. I was there every single day. I was at cheer more than I saw my family. So I'm very into sports. And I think when it comes to, and mind you, my cheer team was co-ed. So I had 2 males on my team. And I think in that instance, there's no problem having males compete with females.
Well, because especially when it comes to cheer, I mean, there's things that because of the biological advantage that men have, there are things that they can do that women could not, in terms of strength, lifting certain people up and maybe throwing people around. I don't know everything that you guys, like what they're all called, but you know what I mean?
Right. But we also get placed against other teams who also have men on their team. So we're somewhat even. But when it comes to, like, I'm just going to use women's swimming. When it comes to swimming and you put a man against all women, how is that fair? Men are biologically stronger than women.
Thank you for telling the truth. You know, you're a transphobe for saying that, apparently.
Then so be it. I mean, biologically, and I think it's because I clearly am a nursing major. I go based off of biology. Biologically, men are stronger than women. I'm not saying there's exceptions. I mean, there are. Sometimes women are stronger than men. I mean, it just depends on how it is. But at the same time, they're physically stronger, but I also think women are mentally stronger than men are.
Smarter or emotionally? Because, like, obviously
emotionally.
I feel like
But like we show our emotions, but I think we can have a lot on our plate and not like freak out.
And I don't disagree at all. One thing I've noticed about women, at least the ones I've met, is that they have an innate ability that most men lack of being able to sense someone else's emotions. And that's
Yeah.
where I really get emotional intelligence from women and being much stronger than men. Is like I could be around somebody all day and they could be in the just like worst mood, so depressed, like somebody could have literally died. And unless they started like bawling their eyes out next to me, I could have no idea. As there's like days where I'm just like going about my day normally, but in my head, like it's awful. And a woman in my life will be like, everything okay? I'm just like, how the heck did you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that?
Yeah, and that's just the biology
Mhm.
of the difference between men and women. So when you look at it that way and you start putting men into women's sports, it becomes unfair. Of course they're going to win every time
Mhm.
because they're physically stronger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There actually was an instance, and I'm just curious on your thoughts because it has to do with cheerleading. South Carolina Panthers just recently brought on the first transgender cheerleader in NFL history. Just curious your thoughts because we did talk about how, like, obviously there's no biological advantage. It obviously made headlines. The cheerleader, what was his name? Biological man, identifies as a female. Justine Lindsay is now one of the Panthers' top cats cheer team. And in a video for a publicity stunt that they were doing, because obviously first trans, ooh, everybody has got to be so
Mhm.
happy about it. Put out something saying that he was going to be, goes by she, but he was going to be a leader for the next generation, was hoping to inspire young people everywhere. What are your thoughts?
I think that in that instance, like you said, there is no biological advantage
Mhm.
um, in cheerleading, and cheerleading is a team.
Mhm.
So they're all working together. They're not working against each other. And when it comes to like the NFL, right? You said that he was in the NFL on the
Yeah,
Pan-.
it's South
Okay.
Carolina Panthers.
Okay. So when it comes to NFL, like those teams don't compete against anybody. Like they're just there to cheer for a game.
Yeah.
So in that instance, that's not giving anybody an unfair advantage. So I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, and so one more sport. I honestly kind of am in agreement. I mean, nobody goes to a football for the most part, unless they're kind of weird. Nobody goes to a football game to watch the cheerleaders. So like just for the cheerleaders. And so, I mean, despite the fact that this biological man is dresses like a woman, kind of makes it a little bit less attractive of a cheer squad. Not that big of a deal to me. There's another sports question I wanted to ask you, just again because of your it is not as much on the trans thing, but I'm just interested. So out of CNN Sports, Haley Van Voorhis makes history as first female non-kicker to play in an NCAA football game. I don't know if you heard about this. This girl was a safety at Division III Shenandoah University, came on with less than a minute remaining in the first quarter on her team's 48-7 victory over Juanita College last Saturday. She's a 19-year-old, a registered quarterback. For tackling Juanita QB. Sorry, I'm just kind of reading. I didn't read through the whole article. I just was thinking about it as we were talking. But basically, a biological woman who identifies as a woman is now playing for an NCAA team, actually got in the game. I'm just curious on your thoughts. Do you think this is historic? Do you think it's dangerous? There's been a lot of conservative commentators talking about it, giving different takes. As a woman who competed in traditionally women's sports, primarily with women, cheerleading obviously being kind of an exception. Just what
Mhm.
are your thoughts? She a
Um,
trailblazer? Is it dangerous?
I think it could be dangerous. I mean, like I said, men are stronger than women, and I think that in this case, again, there's no biological advantage towards the other team. If honestly, I think there might be disadvantage for the team because women just aren't as strong. And I think, like, I mean, it could lead to somebody getting hurt. I mean, I wouldn't want to go on a football team with all guys running at me. Like that's
Yeah.
scary. I mean, I would be scared. I would think I was going to get hurt, and I think that in that situation, it's more of a safety concern in my eyes, as opposed to like a disadvantage or unfairness.
Absolutely. And that's kind of where I'm at with it a little bit. I think the biggest safety concern, in my opinion, is the message that it kind of sends is we've had several decades of a certain wing of the country saying women can do everything men can do. And while I've agreed with it to the point of like, okay, like certain professions, like, yeah, they shouldn't just be male dominated professions. If a woman wants to become a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, go for it. But in terms of things like this, I'm thinking it kind of sets a dangerous precedent of looking at any little girl and saying, you could be the next wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. Actually, they probably could be. The Chicago Bears are crack.
Roughly.
But you know what I mean? Is like, it could kind of set that precedent of like, okay, now you have a little girl who wants to go, who's maybe like your size. You're like what, like 5'4" and like 115 pounds. Like you're a small person.
I have one.
And yeah. And so you could have somebody who is your size who, because they were told their whole life you could do anything a man can do, they go out and do it. And then it's incredibly dangerous. And not to mention the idea of just kind of invading men's spaces. I had an issue with the girls being allowed in Boy Scouts and everything like that. Like there are some things that should be men's spaces and women's spaces. And that's what we've talked about with a lot of sports. That's just my thoughts on it. To end this out, because we only have so much time and I appreciate all the time you've given me so far. I just was hoping that you could give any kind of words of advice or thoughts to young women out there that are in a similar position as you, just being young, female, conservative, who are going through and recognizing a lot of the same problems you are. Any pieces of advice, thoughts?
I would say for anybody who's in the same situation as me, don't change your views just because people make you think you're less than, because you have views that typical women don't have. I could say personally for me, I don't agree with a lot of things women agree with, and I feel like sometimes I get looked down upon because of that. But that doesn't make you any less of a person. We're all entitled to our own opinions, but also at the same time, be able to have conversations with people who don't have the same opinions as you, because I've learned a couple things from people who don't agree with me. Not saying I agree with them, but I learned a few things that I didn't know prior. So I think it's important that everyone just is able to have cordial conversations about topics.
Absolutely. Well, there's actually one more question I totally forgot to ask, and I appreciate that word of advice. Everybody, if you have a young woman in your life, make sure they hear that. You can go find it on my YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, Rumble. All you got to do is look up Cities 92.9 or Speechless with Kev Phares, and you can find this whole interview right there. But I do want to ask quickly, if the 2024 presidential election were held today, who would you vote for and why?
Donald Trump.
Why?
I don't know. I just like him.
Well, I appreciate all the time you've given me. We do have to wrap this up, but thank you so much, Jaida. You want to say hi to Josh real quick?
Hi, Josh. Miss
Okay.
you.
Figure. Yes, Jaida, Josh's sister. Young woman, very bright, young nursing major. And everybody, it's been such an honor to talk with her. I always want to keep talking with young people because these are our future. And I get comments all the time that say, Kevin, you give me hope and everything. And I appreciate it. And I'm happy to give you hope. But it can't just be me. It's got to be other people in this fight together. We have to have these conversations. As Jaida said, it starts with having a conversation. We have to be able to talk to people and have rational discussions with people. And I'm hoping that there's young people that are maybe on an opposite direction of me on any of these issues that want to come on and have a conversation, and they're always welcome to. But everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like this video, comment what you think, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. I'm sure there's somebody in your life that you know that could benefit from the messages Jaida sent. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Speechless. I'm Kev Phares.